I learned a lot. I probably learned more in the visiting room that year than I did in my own because I did travel with the Panthers. No one was using a sewing machine. You did everything by hand. G was the only guy that had him at that point. He came to the bench. It was about 2.5 minutes to go in the game. And he's like, Nas, did you bring that steel to the bench? I said, yeah, I brought it. He goes, I can't stand up. You as an equipment guy, like every time you do that, you're like, God, I hope they score or something good happens.
For over 100 years, hockey is a game of stories. Stories behind everything. Goals, saves, wins and losses, and even the equipment. Equipment in the game has evolved over time, and so many people have seen the changes. That voice at the beginning of this documentary was the voice of Derek Zettlemeyer, one of the few legendary people behind the Flyers bench for the last 20 years. If there is anyone who knows the ins and outs of hockey equipment, it's him. From the Florida Panthers in the late 90s, the Philadelphia Phantoms for a decade, and then with the Flyers from 2007 to 2020, Nasty has definitely seen his way around a hockey locker room. Nasty wouldn't have all the experience without his father, Dave, who was a huge influence on the beginning of his career.
I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship for basketball and soccer actually in college, and originally I wanted to be a college basketball coach. And then probably my junior year, beginning of my junior year, I started realizing how long I was going to have to stay in school and do all this stuff. And I'm like, do I really want to do it? I don't really know. And then I started talking to my dad about, if I could get my foot in the door in hockey. And at that time, he was actually working with Mr. Clark, Bob Clark, in Minnesota, because if you remember, Jay Snyder had fired Clarkie and Minnesota signed him right away. So my dad was working with him. And I started going on my breaks to help my dad and start trying to learn, the process of learning, which is nothing like actually being on the job, which after I graduated, I was fortunate enough to get a job with the Florida Panthers. That's basically how I got in there. And man, did I have a lot to learn. I was so green. And, I just knew I had a good work ethic and I would work hard, but I started learning the first day. But that's kind of how I got in there right out of college. I was so fortunate. It's a lot of times, I know you've heard a cliche, but it's like who you know and not what you know. Sometimes, I was very, very lucky to get to get that opportunity right away.
Even though we mentioned luck, Derek knew that there was going to be some sort of an expectation.
I was an assistant equipment guy and I did the equipment transfer. So my dad was, I'm glad I worked for him, but he expected a lot, and it was a lot of work because what I was in charge of doing was when a team landed the day before, I would pick their equipment up. Obviously the people at the airport were helping me load the truck up. I'd get them to the rink with the trainers. We'd get their stuff all set up. I'd take them back to the hotel. And that was my main job, and taking care of the laundry for both teams. But in Miami or in Florida, we played our games in Miami, and my dad was making me come back sometimes to do practice. And then I didn't have to go pick up the team. So it was crazy, but that was my main thing. But I learned a lot from, I was in the visiting room, and I learned a lot from all the equipment managers. I was fortunate enough to meet all these guys that year, and my dad had been doing it for so long. So everyone treated me really, really well. You're always setting up for the next day is basically what you're doing. So if today was a non-game day, I knew I was going to have to either travel or go to the center to take the skates and the goalie's gear over, because we had 2 sets of equipment. Flyers still do. Most teams do, unless they have their practice facility in their game building, which quite a few teams do now. So it was just an all-day thing, always preparing for the next day, sharpening skates. The list goes on and on. Luckily, we had a lot of people to help with the laundry and doing other things. So, you name it, I did it.
Hockey's obviously a huge game with so much superstition, from guys taking afternoon naps thinking it'll help them win, and some guys even playing with no tape. But Sidney Crosby, who, as a Flyers fan, I absolutely despise, but that's besides the point, is obviously one of the best players to ever play the game. And Sid has always had a specific style when wearing his equipment.
It does have a one-piece stick, but I think it's made the old way, you know what I mean? But his gear, back to his gear, he was just, it was funny because, he's had the same cup for as long as he can remember. The only way it'll stay up on his waist is for him to use his garter belt to hold it. I said, man, are you kidding me with this thing? And he goes, he actually packs it in his carry-on when he goes overseas or anything for like Team Canada or something, because he's afraid someone's going to steal it.
When you start a new job, you hope to be treated well. You hope to be respected and looked at as someone that can learn. One of the traits that comes along with sitting behind a bench and handling equipment is seeing some of the best athletes in the world play in the NHL.
Over the last few years, like when you start getting like Nathan MacKinnon and you're on the bench and you see this guy come flying by, you're like, how is he going that fast? Connor McDavid, obviously, from the first time I saw him, and Connor's hands move as fast as his feet, which is just it's insane. So yeah. I mean, all the great players that everyone loves, it's just like Ovi. Like my place on the bench at home when I was with the Flyers is right where his spot is, and I wonder how many goals I saw go in from that, one tee that he takes from that spot, and pray that our guys, and get killed by it. But yeah, all those guys, man, it was an honor, and I never took a day of for granted. And like I said, I'm so old, I saw a lot of the guys that were really, really good back in the day too. I was very, very fortunate.
Whether it's the friendships made, the view behind the bench, or just the day-by-day activities, it's pretty safe to say that being an NHL equipment manager is arguably one of the coolest jobs in the world.